And uh,
Sorry, I
2020. Oh,
just
that's okay.
remembered to do that.
Okay, so I'll just start. So the idea for these videos came from a workshop on allyship at the virtual NACCB during COVID times in 2020. I would say the kind of the like the germ came a little bit before that in previous meetings, 2016 and 2018, when there were a lot of really great presentations from conservation biologists of diverse backgrounds and people presenting on the importance of diversity in conservation at previous NACCBs, but uh, the we realized that the kind of silverbacks, as we call them, so the kind of older, whiter, maler uh, conservation biologist types seem to be not really paying attention to those or tuning them out. So the idea was, after, we had this workshop, symposium discussion, and one of the ideas that came out of that was, well, can we create some resources that can kind of present stories from conservation biologists of varying backgrounds about how their experiences, how they have experienced the field and how those experiences might have been different from the kind of typical or the kind of majority group experience in conservation biology. So um, we worked with a videographer, and during COVID, of course, we conducted interviews over Zoom with six conservation biologists, each holding kind of different intersecting identities. And I'll just kind of briefly describe each of these. So Leo Douglas is highlighted there. He talked about his experiences as an immigrant from Jamaica and also as a Black conservation biologist earning his PhD and then later in academia. Bray Beltran talked about his experience as a Latino, first in academia and then shifting to working with an NGO, working in private land conservation in the American West. Jessa Madosky talked about her experiences dealing with the accommodations or lack thereof for disabilities and invisible disabilities, in particular in conservation science and academia. Mirna Manteca talked about her experiences as a Latina working with Mexican communities and working on the U.S.-Mexican border. And then Sergio Avila also presented some of his experiences working as an immigrant in the U.S., so kind of working on the border from the U.S. side as well. So we got kind of both sides um, of that kind of particular experience. And then finally, Mary Blair discussed some of her experiences as a woman with kind of an interesting indigenous background. She's, part indigenous Sami. But kind of the intersection of those backgrounds and how they've kind of affected her career and how she kind of views conservation biology through those lenses. So, everyone got a chance to kind of discuss their experiences. We kind of uh, culled those videos down to around 13 to 15 minute chunks. And importantly, we kind of tried to get at like how each of those participants, how they might have kind of benefited from allyship or situations where they could have benefited from allyship from someone in a majority group speaking up at a given time, but they didn't receive help, and that seemed to be there are quite a few instances where people definitely expressed that, well, there was the situation where I really could have benefited from one of the white male conservation biologists who was working with alongside with me when, say, a border guard was asking me for my papers and following me back to our hotel, and that just didn't happen. So it was eye-opening definitely in that way. Um, so yeah, we ended up with this video series. I think we're going to show a couple of clips from some of these videos, which I think Martha might have teed up somewhere, but. Once we had those videos, we were just kind of wondering, what do we do with these? And we can just kind of take take a look at a couple of those, some on the kind of, positive side, some on the negative side.
Great. So yes, I created just 1 minute clips. And so these were sort of gives you a sense of the different questions that were asked. How has your identity affected your relationship with conservation? Experiences that show that your identity the way your identity was treated was a barrier to your participation in conservation, or how have colleagues acted or not, and then sort of what's your vision and what do we need to do. So I'm going to switch. Does that work? Can you all see this now, a different screen? Just want to make sure that that still works. All right, that's what I thought. So we'll start off with Leo Douglas speaking about identity and its influence in conservation work.
In terms of my own work, though, I've definitely noticed that I ask questions differently. Even within science, I would think that it's supposed to be such an objective and value-free thing. And by so doing, I have found that I ask questions that maybe others would not have asked because of their identities. And that's actually what brings a lot of interest and excitement to my work. I must say, though, that I also recognize that this can be something which is troubling, because in reality, people asking different questions and things that others may not necessarily initially get or see can be disturbing, and I understand that aspect of it as well.
The next one is Sergio Avila. He's describing an incident on how others have perceived his identity, negatively impacting his work.
I've received a lot of racial profiling and aggressions that come with that from the U.S. Border Patrol. The U.S. Border Patrol agents along the Arizona-Sonora border, where I conducted research on jaguars and mountain lions and evaluating impacts of the border wall. Law enforcement agents, rather on foot or on helicopters or on ATVs, will find me in remote areas and very, very pointedly have treated me as just a person of color, regardless of a science degree, of the reason why I'm there or who my employer is. They only see a brown person with a backpack. I've received a lot of racial profiling and aggressions that come with that from...
Sorry. And I just want to add that ultimately these experiences continued and led to Sergio abandoning the research that he was doing. So we've lost all that he offered in this work because of the experience. That's one reason why allyship is needed. He needed support. As Brenda indicated, he didn't get it. Another way, before this clip starts, he was speaking about the cases, typically other dominant identities with him, witnessing him receiving discriminatory. He would share with them his experiences, and this is what he had to say about that.
They really feel that diversity is at their heart, but when confronted with an instance, the response is not there. And by that I mean even a response like, I'm very sorry that this has been your experience, or, that's terrible that this has happened. Not even that. It's just been like the silence. And for me, that silence has been a warning. It has been a warning that when stuff hits the fan, I am on my own, and that there will not be anyone there to defend me in a field where I'm already on my own.
So the last clip that I'll share to the question about what her vision is of an inclusive conservation, speaking to what's needed in terms of allyship to achieve that vision.
So I feel those of us who have that privilege have a responsibility to use it in order to help dismantle injustice and work towards equity. In other words, the biggest changes are needed among those who hold power now to take responsibility and invest in changing themselves and their institutions. So I choose to leverage that privilege that I have, as well as my multifaceted worldview, to make space for and lift up the voices of Indigenous scholars and scholars of color, to force conversations that recognize and address how certain communities are and have been marginalized from conservation biology. And we can make these spaces to question systems and structures that continue to reflect and privilege Western worldviews over all others. And just making space for these conversations are so important. So I feel those of us who have that.
And all of these have much more to share across even the short 11 to 14. I want to emphasize these are just 6. We do get in, at least for someone like myself, in fact, whoever you are, you're bringing in voices that are different, and it is than to just have them read about the issues. At least that's how. Brendan, to talk about their launching of this curriculum to start.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martha, and thank you, everybody. Yeah, I think maybe just the place to start was that when I first learned about the videos from Brendan and the DEI committee and watched them, I just thought, boy, they really moved me, and it sure seemed like there could be a place in the classroom for them. And so I reached out to Brendan and said, hey, what do you think about this? And he said, sure, let's do it. And so we developed a little bit of kind of, curriculum around it. And I think I first started to think about it in, I was teaching a senior level biology majors, essentially EECB track students classes, tropical island ecology and evolution. It's basically kind of like a capstone course spring semester of their senior year. And a bit of that kind of focus was this kind of launching of their careers, right? And so some professional development in addition to other, kind of objectives for the course. And I thought this might be a really good time and place to, kind of try this out. And so, so Brendan and I did, I think that was in the spring of 2023. And it seemed to, really kind of hit home and move the needle with the students. And so then the following fall, we tried it. This is a picture that you're seeing here. Another one of my courses was in the Tropical Conservation Biology and Environmental Science Master's program at UH Hilo. And in their first semester, like a number of core courses, and this was kind of one of those core courses. And so it's the whole cohort of the incoming masters in that Tropical Conservation Biology Environmental Science program. And we kind of ran it again with some slight modification, and it seemed to go pretty well. So we did it again that following spring, again in that senior level course, and then again the following fall back in the the master's level TCBS program. So we've done it a total of 4 times in 2 different classes, and each run's been slightly different, but mostly the same. And I'll kind of give just a little bit of context. So UH Hilo, as many of you may be aware, is on the Big Island, and it's a regional university. It's fairly small. There's about 2,700 students, mostly undergraduate. There are a few master's programs, including this one I just mentioned, and just a couple of doctoral programs. So I think we kind of covered this. One of the things about UH Hilo that's really wonderful is it's incredibly diverse, and you see a little bit of that kind of demographic breakdown on this slide. So just a kind of outline of generally what we did, because each, iteration was slightly different. It wasn't exactly the same each time, and I'll try and get at that a little bit here. But basically, what we did is we assigned some readings before the first in-class session of watching some of the videos together as a class. And the following slide will have some kind of little screenshots of the titles and authors of each of these three papers. But we just started with one, the first being a paper on kind of anti-racism and EECB, Cronin et al. 2021, you may or may not be familiar with. And then for the second session, and this is where things sometimes differ between the classes, either way, they would read these two other papers. One is on supporting nonlinear careers, and the other on parental leave policies. The differing kind of between the classes, in some cases, they would watch the other videos that we didn't watch in class on their own and then do some reflections and then bring those back. And in some cases, we'd have a second full session in class watching the kind of other half, the other three videos. So that's the kind of, brings us to the in-class piece here in the middle box, which is basically we would start with an overview of the activity and setting out some guidelines for difficult conversations. And I'll go through what those were in just a moment. We'd view the videos together. And then we had questions that, we posed to the whole group and have class discussion. After class, this is where, like I said, things were sometimes a little different, but sometimes they would watch the rest of the videos on their own and respond to prompts and reflect in writing and then come back and share out. And sometimes we would come back together as a group, watch the videos, respond to prompts, and share out without the writing piece. So these are those three papers that I mentioned that were just kind of preparatory readings. The first being, as I mentioned, the Cronin et al. Anti-Racist Interventions to Transform Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation Biology Departments. If you haven't seen this, I think it's a very important paper. It really, does a good job of kind of quantifying and laying out just what the problem is, and then suggesting, at least some of what we can do in terms of solutions moving forward. The paper below that in PLOS Biology, I thought was particularly important for the master's program in tropical conservation biology, environmental science at Hilo. We have a lot of non-traditional students who've been working in the field in conservation and allied fields for many, many years. I've had, families, et cetera, all kinds of diverse experience, different professional experiences, and they're coming back. This is a kind of a short piece, but I think a really effective piece to get that conversation going. And then the other one here on the right, why two scientist moms made a database of parental leave policies by Amanda Gorton and Tess Granger, is a kind of short piece, basically just a couple of pages, and it's easy to read. It just takes 10 minutes, but it's really again effective at kind of illustrating the problem that women face in terms of starting families. And it's basically a comparison of US policies versus Canadian policies. And it really gets that conversation going, and I think in an important way. So yeah, this turned out to be really important. I think even more so than I had anticipated. Was kind of the setting the tone and developing some ground rules for conversation, and a little bit guidelines for the students for dealing with what can be difficult discussions. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. And acknowledging the reality of the situation in the field, but also highlighting reasons for hope and kind of trying to balance those things. We just borrowed from the American Zoological Association kind of community agreements for these kinds of difficult conversations, and I'll just speed through these for the sake of time. But I think they're all really important, and they in the classroom. I think if you can take some time with them and even unpack them a little bit, because like I say, I think they turned out to be really important. To be present and stay engaged, to listen with respect, to trust the intent of others, and acknowledge impact of your own words. Recognize your ideas as representing your own unique perspective. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. Expect and
No.
The intention here is just, say what, what's on your mind and get it out there. What's said here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here. And so some of the sharing that happened was deeply personal stuff, and students did really open up in ways that I think it was important that this was one of the guidelines that, that some of the, personal experiences don't leave the classroom, but the overall, kind of learning does. So for the first kind of session where we, first read the Cronin et al. Paper in advance and then watch 3 of the videos together as a group. In between each of the 10 to 14-minute videos, we would stop and we would have discussion as a group. And these are just some of the questions that we came up with. Of course, they're flexible for what would work well in your settings. The first was, what struck you most about their lived experience and how it intersects with their professional experiences in our field? The second, does any or all of it connect to your own experiences in your life and in our field of work? And then what could be done to make change for the better as we move forward? And at what level or levels are you most inspired to contribute? For example, as an ally for those in your immediate circle of work, at the institutional or university level, at the society and or structural levels, or all of the above? And then after watching these videos, what do you think are some concrete changes, or I gotta move to my chat here, or actions that could improve equity and inclusion in conservation biology? And these prompts really seem to stimulate good discussion. In the second round, yeah, Martha, you can advance the slide, thank you. Again, reading the other 2 papers in advance on supporting nonlinear careers and parental leave policies. We would watch the remaining 3 videos either on our own or together in the class. And there's kind of some, it's getting established with that same question again of, do any or all of these experiences and their careers connect to your own experience so far as early scientists? But then kind of moving into some new questions. How does hearing about the difficulties experienced by others in their career progression influence your attitude towards your potential career and your plans for moving forward? And then again, what could be done and at what levels? Same question as before. And then lastly, come to class prepared, and this is for those that were doing as a homework assignment, with written responses, in this case by next Monday, prepared to share what you're comfortable sharing in a class discussion about these issues and how to better support one another in our field as we move forward.
Thanks so much. That's great. I'll just kick us off. So basically, we learned about this work that Matt and Brendan were doing, and so I took it into my winter class at UW-Bothell in 2025 and created a jigsaw discussion and reflection version, and then Jessica refined that even more and ran that in the springtime, winter spring, sorry, at Irvine. So just to give you a little bit of background on UW-Bothell. We're a regional university, about 6,000 students, primarily undergrad, limited master's, no doctoral. We have a less diverse population than at University of Hawaii Hilo, but we have under 30% who self-identify as white, and so 70% that self-identify as non-white. 40% first generation, 35% Pell eligible. And then within the course itself, it was a junior level undergraduate course in biodiversity conservation. I had 49 students, 74% were in a major primarily conservation and restoration science, and 26% were for distribution, and most of those were pre-law or business students. This was a module that I did in the 4th session of the class. And I'll come back to this later, but importantly, that took place on the 16th of January, which is before the 20th of January. So, Jessica.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. After learning about these allyship videos and what Brendan and Matthew and Martha had done, I was very interested in incorporating it into the graduate conservation science course that I was in the process of teaching when I learned about this resource. at UC Irvine in our Master's in Conservation and Restoration Science program. This is a professional degree program, a 2-year program that is very largely field-based with a marine or terrestrial track that the students complete with a core course curriculum that's taken as a cohort in the first year. And conservation science in our winter quarter is one of those core required courses for students in this program. I had 22 students in the course, including all the students in this program, plus a couple of PhD students who opted in, who were from ecology or earth system science. And I brought this into the 10th week of our course, which is the last on the quarter system. And our weekly topic during that week is on transformative change. And so I sort of already had the course planned and the topics outlined at the moment I wanted to bring this in. And so I found a place where it could kind of fit in with what I already had planned when I discovered that resource. So I just give you that context since the timing of the integration of this was more opportunistic and less intentional. And I have some thoughts about that. So let me share next an outline of how we did this jigsaw discussion. So in both of our cases, we assigned students to individual videos, 1 or 2 videos per student that they were supposed to watch before class and complete a pre-class reflection or writing prompt. That was a private submission to us through Canvas with some questions related to the videos they watched. And then in class, the jigsaw discussion had 2 rounds. The first where the students were in groups with others who watched the same video, and there was a set of discussion questions for that. And then the second round where each student was in a group with other students who'd watched different videos, and they could share the perspective from the one that they watched and their thoughts on how it contributed to questions related to whole class discussion and reporting out on allyship. We both then included a written reflection on a class discussion board. In my case, students are required to read and respond to their classmates' discussion posts that had some further questions later in the week after they had had time to really think about how that class discussion went. So just to give you an idea of the prompts that we used for the pre-class reflection, this is after watching the video. In general, what did they learn and what was shared by the conservationists? What struck them most about their lived experience and how it intersects with their professional experiences in conservation? Whether our students experience any similar dynamics in their lives as they pursue their education. And then what changes would you recommend for conservationists with similar backgrounds? So this is the kind of allyship action piece. If you're individually assigning videos like I was, an option is to then have specific questions related to each individual video. And I chose to do that because there were some things I wanted to highlight in particular or draw attention to the unique context of those individual videos. So we're happy to make those available as well. And then Martha, you can share what we did in class.
Sure. Yeah. So, first we have them all meeting with others who watch the same video. So they are basically sharing what they already had. So responding to the prompts that they thought about earlier. But we also asked them, give that opportunity if they felt comfortable to share issues from their own experience that they think others should know about, or just issues pull up that they think people should know about. And then to sit there together brainstorming what could be done to improve the experience of a person who is similar to the person whose video they watched. Then they remix up. So they get into a group where at least one person has seen each of the different videos. So all 6 videos are represented. So they each share first what happened in the video that they watched. And then they try to say, well, what, do I hear things that are common across all of them or several of them, or there's some really unique things happening? And then thinking actively, how do I learn more than just what I learned from the one I watched, plus hearing about these other 5? And how can I do more to improve the experiences of other people working in conservation? And then I've totally blocked the last prompt, Jessica. What did we say?
How might we be able to act as allies to others? That action orientation.
I like it. And so, and yeah, I think Jessica, you were going to do this next one.
Yes. So after they have the jigsaw discussion, we had a whole class discussion and reporting out on this topic of what is needed to build a conservation movement that is just. Recognizing that allyship is part of that, but certainly not all of that. And so I also used these questions here for part of my post-class reflection as well. What's essential to developing conservation practice that would contribute to equitable outcomes among peoples and promote greater justice in society? And how would you explain to someone not in this class why these efforts are important in our field? And I looked through my student reflections after we did this, and I pulled this one quote that I think highlights one of the big observations and conclusions that many students came up with, which is that a just conservation movement requires recognizing that environmental issues are deeply tied to social justice, power, and governance. From Myrna's experiences, this is in reference to one of the videos, it's clear that conservation without addressing systemic inequities, land access, resource control, and racial profiling is incomplete. And so I think that is, is really powerful to have that recognition, but it also presents like an even greater challenge to grapple with from the perspective of allyship, because it takes it outside of the field entirely. But I think those connections are really meaningful, and it means that the work that we are doing in conservation hopefully can translate to other spaces as well. Okay, there we go. I had a couple of readings that my students were doing that was already associated with our topic of transformative change, which included this Diaz paper from Science that is this call for transformative change based on human-driven decline of life on Earth. And they have some great diagrams that describe some leverage points for how we should think about this. A lot of which include things like community building and inclusivity and partnerships that I thought related to allyship already. And then we read a chapter from Rambunctious Gardens, Saving Nature in a Post-Wild World, called A Menu of New Goals. And I have the students do some reflection on how allyship fits in with these visions of new goals for conservation and what transformative change actually looks like.
And for myself, in addition to Diaz et al., which they had read the week before, I had them watch a different video from Robin Wall Kimmerer. She has many that you can find on the internet. She's a beautiful speaker, Indigenous Potawatomi scientist who is offering a lot of translations in between traditional ecological knowledges and Western knowledges, and also a different answer or a different way of answering questions around what is it that we need to do. Another that I paired was Justly Biodiverse, which is put out by the Endangered Species Coalition. And it has a lot of vignettes of how different aspects of biodiversity are critical to humans and also critical in that they're inequitably distributed. And so that doing biodiversity conservation is a major social justice issue in and of itself. And so it allows them to think about things in both directions. Then we thought a lot about how to evaluate this. Both Jessica and I landed on complete, incomplete, participating in class and the pre-post class written work. Really, our goal was to allow it to be really open. So we had reflection-based, that we're not judging their reflections. And then Jessica had them with, feedback to each other along with her own feedback where I mostly had individual, I wrote individual comments to each student about some of what came up in their reflections. And then I'll pass back to Matt and Brendan.
Yeah, so one of the things that Brendan and I started to think about as we were doing this was maybe it's a good idea to get some more formal feedback from the students and try and get a sense of kind of how, if at all, it is impacting them. And so we reached out to a colleague who's a biology education researcher, Sarah Brownell at Arizona State University, and she was very gracious to help us develop a set of, I think, 7 questions. We only did this in one of the 4 iterations. I think, moving forward, it would be nice to do it each time if it, kind of fits in terms of the space in any course. But just to share just a couple of quotes, just to give a sense of some of the feedback that we received. One student says, I related to both Jessa's and Bray's experiences and their careers. And I think this is important. One of the questions was really trying to find the commonality of challenges. Everybody, I think Martha was getting at this at the beginning, everybody has their own, all of us have our own unique challenges, but we also share challenges in common. And so the student, I think, is getting at that really relating to Jessa and Bray's. As I mentioned in class, the fear of not being qualified enough for jobs in the future has crossed my mind many times. And as for Jessa's experience, I related heavily to her experiences as a woman in the workplace. Another student says, listening to the struggles Sergio went through made me feel very sad, especially when no one stood up for him. If any of my future coworkers are ever treated that way, I will make sure to stand up for them so they do not feel alone. So this is just a little bit of the feedback. I wish I had time to share more, but I think if it does fit, it's valuable to get to solicit some feedback.
So the intention here in this slide was just if there was anything else that we wanted to share with all of you, but I am also watching the time and I wondered maybe we might hold on to some of these ideas a little bit more. I will share the slides in the chat in a little bit, but we are anxious also to have you all get involved with this. So if that's all right, I'll head on to this point, which is that we really want to turn it over to you. How might you adapt these ideas or materials to your context, course or not? And so we thought maybe you could take just a few minutes individually, maybe not 5, but just pre-write some ideas. That might be about how you might adapt these or about how you might share quickly what it is that you've done. So we come then as a group and share, any of you who feel like you want to share, tell us a little bit about your context and your ideas, or, what are resources that you think we all ought to know about. Does that sound all right with everybody? Okay. I'm going to stop the share for a minute and we'll just be quiet for a couple of minutes, let you think about your contexts and any questions that you might have, etc. Feel like you might be able to start sharing? Does that feel you need more time? Colin came off back to camera, so I thought that might mean he was ready. All right. Would anybody like to share some ideas? Yeah, Colin.
Well, I feel like you just called me out there. But I just want to say I think it resonates a lot with me, certainly teaching at a community college, because I have so many non-traditional, non-linear students who are starting or restarting, who are parents who have a disability. And this is the place they come back to. And so making sure you're including your sense of science. And I just think about this contrast from my experience as a student, which was all those classes you took, each 100, 200, 300, and 400 level and beyond was really intended to filter out students and to say that they don't, they're not enough. And so I've tried to make my classes a pump that are just drawing in and pulling in because that's the students I see. And those are students coming in. Uh, Oregon population is rapidly diversifying. It's about 46% students who are non-white in the K-12. We don't see that in college yet, but that's the direction we're moving to, right? So that just resonates to me. I was excited for some of the readings. I was just going to drop a URL in here too if you're at all interested. But there is the Rios Institute, which is racially just, inclusive, and open STEM education. But they have a great series of podcasts as well as an alternative to maybe not an alternative, but as an additional to another resource, another multimedia resource. And they do a series of faculty professional development reflections on that as well. And that's just other different diverse voices that I found. I did one of their trainings for last winter term, and I just really liked it. It was a good place for reflection and introspection. So, yeah, I'm excited for some of this.
Thanks.
I can jump in to say, in my teaching context, I teach a seminar class to help seniors and juniors finish their senior thesis research in environmental science fields. And we have every year, it's a 2 semester course, that every year we have, actually, I guess every year, every semester. I think it's every semester we have an environmental justice or a justice and environmental research session. And I was one of the ones who spearheaded it originally years ago based on a student of mine's like call for action in that. And we've turned it into a student-led session, right? So the students get to decide what it is they want to focus on, how they want to facilitate it, and it gives them a little bit of a taste of planning and organizing an event. But I have an idea of how I might be able to package these experiences, this type of engagement, as a menu option for the students who are always overloaded with all these other things that they signed up to do. And this is volunteer based, right? It's not, there's no grade associated with it. So I'm looking forward to thinking about how I can, package this in such a way that they could take it and run with it and use it how they see fit for what they're interested in talking about in that session.
That's great. Does anybody else have things that they want to share?
I might jump in. Um, Lots of thoughts. It's hard for me to take things. I always view things within context. So thinking of a variety of different contexts when it comes here. I'm recalling um an ECCB gathering in 2018 where we were concerned with some of the language that one of the speakers was going to present with, which included like language like war on poaching, which resembled war on terror, war on drugs, highly racialized. And we tried to warn the conference organizers in advance, specifically the like diversity group. They did not really hear us out prior. And it was a really intense and bad talk that was received very, very well. The person was complaining about having to divert funds from conservation to women's rights, AIDS, all these different things were taking away from his ability to illegally buy ammunition from the army so they can shoot poachers. Um, and the reason why I bring it up is because I think it's important to not just take conservation or to not perceive conservation as just doing good or value neutral in a way context. Um, we could be more inclusive, but are we perpetuating what conservation can be as a tool for colonialism, for racism, for extraction? Um, and so it's that was just a point that I felt like it was important to bring into the conversation, and also how are we as the instructors, I know that technically I'm not that much of an instructor, but how are we as an instructor, um, not just offering the students this room to reflect on their own, but are we able to show, the ability to make mistakes and the ability to be willing to listen to students when we do make mistakes and we do things that are wrong and perpetuate these things. So I wanted to throw those two things into the mix.
Thank you. That's totally invaluable. Um, I think that there's a lot more the four of us could share. There's clearly a lot all you here can also share. We'd love to be able to keep up the conversation. One thing that we have all your emails. We could set up a group if you wanted to have more conversation or find some time to chat at the break tomorrow. However you might like a chance to continue on, because we should rejoin the main room at this point. But really excited. I'm glad that we did share in the beginning where you all are coming from, because already, there's so many places that, we're acting and trying to act, and it's really important to have that overlap. So would love to talk more. But let's dive back in and just feel like you can connect with any of us to keep these conversations going. Thank you all. And see you in the main room.